Katie. We have Password to Larkspur Lane. We are on Chapter 11, A Hazardous Drop. Quickly, Nancy knelt beside the unconscious servant. "Morgan!" she said urgently, and lightly slapped his cheek. He did not stir. She wet a clean towel at the sink and patted his face. A few moments later, he moaned and muttered, "Last warning, tomorrow night." Then his eyes opened, and with Nancy's help he managed to sit up. She called the others, and while Mrs. Corning telephoned the doctor, the girls assisted the man to his room. Mr. Corning seated himself beside the bed, but Morgan would speak to no one. In a short time, Dr. Bennet, an old friend of the family, arrived. He said the houseman had suffered a slight heart attack and ordered him to be kept quiet. That means no questions, Nancy thought. She'd been mulling over the significance of the larkspur in the package. She put them in a vase. When the doctor had gone, she led the rest of the group into the living room and told the whole story. "Larkspur again!" exclaimed George. "I don't get it." "That's one of the clues in your other case, Nancy," Bess said, puzzled. "Probably the two are connected," the young sleuth replied. She told the Cornings briefly about Mary Eldridge. Bess looked surprised. "Why, what could Morgan have to do with the old lady's kidnappers?" "But Morgan has always been the soul of honesty," protested Mrs. Corning. "Perhaps not always," Nancy said gently. "I believe he may have a prison record, under another name, of course. It would explain why he needed forged recommendations. Now Adam Thorne wants repayment." "Adam Thorne!" exclaimed George. "Why him?" "Because all the years Morgan worked for the Cornings, no one bothered him. But after Adam Thorne broke out of prison, the friendship card arrived, and the blue fire began." Mr. Corning stirred uneasily. "You spoke of repayment. What did you mean?" "I think Thorne and his gang want to rob this house. Remember, the friendship card had no written message on it, but the picture showed a cottage with the door open." "I see," said Bess. "That was the message. Open the door." Mrs. Corning was pale. "Do you know when it is to be?" "Tomorrow night, I think," replied Nancy. "I believe the Larkspur was a signal to Morgan, his last chance to cooperate. Probably the gang showed the blue fire and abducted Morgan to intimidate him." Mr. Corning's face flushed with anger. "Scoundrels! We'll get the police at once!" "Wait," said Nancy. "This is only a theory. If we hold off until tomorrow night, we'll see if we're right. Maybe we can catch the thieves red-handed and solve both cases at once." "But in the meantime," George said worriedly, "Morgan may have told the gang where you are." Nancy nodded. "Yes, I've thought of that." When Mr. Drew telephoned her a few minutes later, he had disquieting news. The lawyer had reported to the police before flying to Chicago and asked them to keep in touch with him. "Lieutenant Mulligan informed me they had not been able to trace the kidnap car. Also, when they arrived at the Tucker estate, it was deserted. The gang took the pigeons." "I understand, Dad. My visit forced them to run. They'll be more eager than ever to get me out of the picture." An hour later, Nancy, Ned, and their friends were watching the swimming race at Camp Hiawatha. In the fun and excitement, she found it hard to remember the threat of danger. Cheers and singing filled the air as the young campers put all their high-spirited enthusiasm into the contests. When the swimming meet was over, she said, "It was great, Ned. Your little boys did so well." "Thanks," he said proudly. "Now we can go swimming. Bert and Dave and I have free time." The boys showed their guests where to change into the suits they had brought, then met them at the water's edge. Tons of ocean sand had been transported overland to make a beach for the camp. A float was moored a few rods from shore with a tower and a springboard for diving. The three couples swam out to the float on which a dozen young people were frolicking. Ned introduced everyone. "Oh, you're the detective," said one boy, playfully shielding his face with one arm. Nancy laughed. "I promise not to delve into any of your secrets." George called, "But watch out, my friend." Suddenly Ned asked, "How about a little diving?" One by one, the group went off the high board. Presently, it became an impromptu meet. "Nancy, show them that new one you just learned," Bess urged. "I'll try," she smiled, "but I may flop." As everyone watched, Nancy balanced upside down on the edge of the board for a breathtaking moment, then thrust herself off. Her body revolved in the air and straightened out so that her pointed toes cleaved the water like a knife. Down she plunged into the green waters of the lake, then bobbed to the surface to hear the cheers of the spectators. "Wonderful! Perfect!" Panting, Nancy climbed back onto the float. As she threw herself down in the sun to rest, Ned came over. "That was a beauty, Nancy." "Just luck," she insisted. Later, when Nancy swam ashore with her friends, she was met by Mr. Dennis, the camp director. "Great diving exhibition, young lady. How would you like a job as counselor?" "Thank you," Nancy said, smiling, "but I already have a job." "Well, you and your friends stay to dinner," the man said cordially, "and the evening camp." As he walked away, a bugle sounded. "We fellows must go now," said Dave, "but we'll take you home after taps," so after the song for the night. Nancy called Mrs. Corning to tell her they would not be home for dinner. Then the girls went to the guest dining hall. During the meal, two small boys appeared at their table with their arms full of parkas. "Ned and Dave and Bert sent you their coats," piped the tallest. "'Cause you didn't bring yours," said the other. They put the jackets on an empty chair and fled as the girls thanked them. It grew chilly after dinner, and the trio were glad to put on the parkas and pull up the hoods. George flapped her dangling sleeves. "What a great fit this is!" "Now you can't tell us apart," said Bess. When it was dark, a long line of singing boys filed up a hill behind the camp. The girls followed, their flashlights bobbing. At the top, the three stopped to look around. The wooded hill sloped steeply to a rocky drop-off. 15 feet below it was a huge bonfire. The girls watched the campers wind slowly down the path and saw that the first ones were already seated on another slope to the far side of the fire. "Come on," said Nancy, "but watch your step." She went first, with George beside her and Bess on the right. As they picked their way downward, they could hear the giant blaze crackling. Smoke billowed up, and Bess paused, coughing. Suddenly, a powerful push from behind knocked Bess off her feet. Screaming, she began to roll down the hill toward the drop-off and the leaping flames. "Uh-oh, I have to see how they're going to rescue her,"